All right, so I got my RSG skid plates. These are the same ones for the 4runner. These are going on my GX460. A couple things to point out is I just love the front skid plate. It is very similar to the CBI design, except that it came in a week instead of waiting 3 months. So that's why I ended up canceling my CBI order and getting these from RSG. It ties in with 4 bolts in the very front, whereas a lot of the other skid plates like the RCI only use 2 small bolts. These use 4 big bolts, so it's way more sturdy. This is all nice and boxed in. It's got nice trusses here. These are the factory frame bolts, or your 212s. But most importantly, we come back here, it uses 2 big lag bolts all the way through the cross member. So this skid plate is extremely beefy. A lot of these skid plates, these mounts right here, end up getting twisted. Well, they made these really big, trussed them up, and tied them in to this brace here. So love the front skid plate. We got to see how it mounts up, but it looks like it's gonna be really beefy. Yes, as usual, things get beat up during shipping. This box was absolutely destroyed because it's a very heavy skid plate, so no surprise there, but it's gonna hit plenty of rocks, so whatever. Gonna go ahead and try to get that installed. No complaints with the front one. From the pictures I've seen, looking at it right now, it's pretty thick, it's really heavy, 3/16 steel, and powder coated black. I didn't go with aluminum because I like steel. I can work on it myself. It takes abuse better. You just got to make sure you have good corrosion protection and you rinse it off so you don't have, salt and snow piling up in here. It does have an access port. I'm not sure how well that's going to work on the GX460 versus the 4runner, but we'll figure that out when it needs an oil change in the near future. So here's the middle skid plate, or the transfer case skid plate. I don't really love it. I actually prefer the CBI design, but again, I couldn't get one of those in time, in a reasonable amount of time, so I got this. So it bolts up with 3 fasteners here to these 3 square lag bolts on the front skid plate, so that will join. Let me pull it over like that right there. You can see how that works. Then you've got 2 big lag bolts here. So it doesn't bolt up with nearly as many fasteners, but this skid plate doesn't get really rammed into stuff, right? It just slides over stuff, you would hope. So should be fine, especially because this one is mounted so solid and it ties in right there. But unlike the RCI or the CBI skid plates, it doesn't give you another cross member back here. It just uses these 2 big mounts, and then they weld in some plates to kind of stiffen it up after that. It's also got stiffeners here. I really would have liked to have a second cross member back here and have this come up more to give me more protection for my transfer case actuator. I thought about making my own to do that, or doing some kind of combination of this and the RCI. But one good thing here is that this one's totally flat, where the RCI has some bumps in it and the CBI has one big bump, because this spot right here is where your exhaust comes under the transfer case. If I was going to design this myself, I would have cut a big hole here, let the exhaust dip down into the hole, and have it be exposed a little bit, and that would let me bring the whole skid plate up, half an inch, because I'm all about clearance. But it is nice that this keeps the belly pan nice and flat for sliding over stuff, so that is one benefit of this design. And the main reason you got to do this is because catalytic converter protection. So these cover up your cats, these wings right here, so it makes it really hard to steal your cats. And they did put some trusses here where it goes under the transfer case. But again, it's going to want to bend right here, right? Because that's where it's thin, where the exhaust comes through, and there's really no supports. So I wouldn't jack the truck up on this part of it. What it may end up doing is trying to join this to my gas tank skid plate somehow with some sort of bracket to kind of help support that from bending up. Alrighty, so I'm installing my RSG skid plates. First step is to remove the stock junk. You can see how thin that stuff is. Pretty pathetic. It bolts on in 2 pieces, 1 piece here and 1 piece back here. There's just some 12mm bolts and it all comes off. Those little bolts right there. One thing to note is I have this Ironman bumper, which has this filler plate right here that sits on top of these supports. Or I guess it really sits beneath it. These supports go away with the RSG and the CBI skid plates. So I've got to remove this guy so I can take these off, and then I'm gonna have to figure out how I want to attach this to my RSG skid plate. I'll probably just drill some bigger holes. As you see, it's got to go up another 3/4 of an inch to sit flush against this, because these go away. So that kind of changes where this is going to sit and mount. But I think there's enough slack in all of these, or if I loosen it up, get it sitting happy, I should be able to just pinch it between my new skid plate and this frame piece. The rest of it is stock, so that should all bolt up just fine. I say should, because these custom aftermarket parts never fit quite right. It's the next thing you run into is that you see this top flat right here, this piece of angle iron. This has to bolt flat up to this part of the frame. However, there are a couple of brackets for, I think it's transmission cooler lines, that are in the way there. So not only is my filler plate going to sit down here, these brackets are there. So I'm just going to go ahead and chop them off, I guess. And that's not great, but I got to find another way to secure those lines. What I did was I just drilled one little hole there. There was already a hole in the top, so I could put 2 zip ties. Same thing over here. Drilled one hole, zip tie will go through. So you can kind of see there's a hole on the top of this bar, and I'll put a zip tie there. And I lopped off the tabs, so that's secure enough. The skid plate will sit up against the bottom of the tabs here, and that'll hold them and then hold the lines in the correct spot. Kind of pain in the ass, but just like everything else in this truck, nothing's really a direct fit for a GX460. After those modifications, this is how it sits. This is my factory Ironman filler plate. It sits flush against the bar, and you can see my zip tie contraptions are clear of it. And because the skid plate kind of sits at the bottom of these little tabs, it holds it in there pretty good. So I think the lines are secure enough, and now I got to put up the skid plate. Make sure that you have these slots lined up. That's the one big bolt, and then there is the 12mm bolt. So it should go up just fine now and sit underneath this plate, I think. So now it's time for the heavy lifting. Front skid plate is installed. Man, that was a pain in the ass. Mostly because I had to find a bunch of bolts because mine were missing. Make sure you use bolts with nice big washers. Those holes in the skid plate are pretty wallered out to give you some adjustment, and with a small washer you lose a lot of strength. So we've got 2 14s and 2 12s up front, then 2 14s here and here, and then lag bolts in the back all the way through that cross member. And there's actually a big square washer on top of that with a big 19mm nut. So I really like the design of this front skid plate. I'm not worried about it at all. I think it will handle a ton of abuse without shifting, like many other skid plates for these trucks do. And it's just badass all around. Now, you do give up a little bit of clearance with these type of skid plates. You see how there's a good bit of space under the diff and stuff? That's because they give you a perfectly slick bottom. They're made to fit a couple different trucks. They're made to fit KDSS. So well, you're losing a little bit of clearance, thicker metal, but you're getting better protection. So you can kind of see there's a lot of space on top of it for airflow. These factory skid plates are contoured like crazy, and because of that, you get a little more clearance. But again, you get really not a whole lot of protection. It matches up with my Ironman filler okay. I kind of wish that Van Ironman filler was farther back to make that line up better, but it looks okay. You won't really notice it with the weight of the truck on it. Plenty of space for the KDSS sway bar to actuate. Plenty of clearance from the differential mounts and everything. So it's solid. It's way stronger than factory, and it reinforces this beam right here that goes underneath the radiator, which is then tied to my front bumper right here. So that skid plate reinforces the whole front of the truck from the bumper backs. Pretty freaking cool. Okay, so as much as I love the front part of the skid plate, I hate the rear of it. So it hangs off really far behind the cross member to support the transfer case, but there's no beam. So all this is pretty floppy. You see it wiggle? I'm gonna try to improve that by tying it into my gas tank skid plate, my RCI skid plate there, because it doesn't totally protect my actuator. It doesn't protect it all that much at all, really. This back skid plate is definitely an afterthought compared to the front one. I love the front design. It's tied in very well. This back one only has 2 smaller lag bolts through the cross member, and then it bolts to the front skid plate with 3 lag bolts. It's just not fastened to the frame nearly as secure as the front, and it's not nearly as well supported. And I knew this when I ordered it. I much prefer the design of the CBI, but I waited 3 months and finally gave up on them because they really couldn't give me an ETA. So this is what I got. I got to make it work, but I really don't like it. So another thing is these little spacers welded on there, and they don't fit up against the frame very well. There's actually this little circle cut out in the frame. You can kind of see it there, and you would expect them to kind of sit up. There it goes. It'll focus. There we go. Come on. There it is. You'd expect it to sit up in that little divot, but it doesn't. The pipe diameter they're using the spacer is too big. So the skid plate hangs down another inch more than it needs to because it doesn't delete these bars. The CBI deletes these bars so you don't have that growth right there hanging down. This guy. That goes away with the CBI design. So you lose some ground clearance. It looks kind of goofy. It is totally flat where the CBI has a little hump on the bottom right there underneath your exhaust. But I really don't like this back skid plate. What they did was they sell a thinner version of this back skid plate, which is just for catalytic converter protection so people don't steal your cat. They just made it thicker and sold it as a skid plate, but it really doesn't fasten to the frame in enough places. So I'm still playing with it. You can see where it's all nicked up from UPS. I'm still playing with it, trying to get it to mount fairly decent. I'm going to probably have to loosen up every bolt in the front skid plate and may mess with its alignment to get this to line up a little closer, which, boy, I am not happy about. But you got to do what you got to do. All right, the GX460 armor is finally complete. So in addition to installing the transfer case skid, I installed a little bracket, a little homemade bracket I made. What that does is it adds a lot more protection for this transfer case actuator for my high and low and center diff lock. If you can see there, it wasn't very protected before. Now it's very well shielded for the most part. Honestly, I would like it to come over this way more towards me, like stick out here, but that's gonna have to do. That's all I had to work with. And it also makes the 2 skid plates stronger. So this gas tank skid plate, I didn't love it because these brackets hang down so far. It can actually twist if you hit something hard enough, but that's gonna keep rocks from catching on the edge and twisting it. Also, I didn't like how this back end wasn't supported very well, so that stiffens this up too. So kind of killed a lot of birds with one stone. I think it's pretty good. I only put 1 bolt in each of them, so it swivels a little bit. So if I have to take the skid plate off, the alignment isn't, you know, a huge pain in the ass to get back on, but I think that should be plenty strong enough for those carriage bolts. And now we got to go find some rocks to drag it across. So to recap, we've got RSG front skid plate, engine, and then the transfer case to skid plate, to the RCI gas tank skid plate, to the C4 differential skid plate, and then we've got Southern Style Off-Road rock sliders, SSO, and an Ironman front bumper. So I literally got almost every different protection component I could get and made them all work together. And that's kind of what you have to do because this truck has very few options and everything's a super long wait. Oh, and the back bumper is a True North fab. So yeah, completely hodgepodge of armored parts all mixed together. And they have slightly different finishes and stuff like that. And of course, I don't care. So now it's well armored and I can take it to Moab.